Hello, my name is Peter John Hunt, and today I'm going to show you how to set up AJAX in WordPress custom rolled. Let's hop in. All right, you can see here I've got just kind of a base theme going on that I've just added a little bit of markup to just to have something on the page. And then I've got my VS Code open here with just that base theme prepped here. So let's go ahead and just start by adding a form. Technically, you could, really you could do whatever you want. You could have a button trigger AJAX or something else entirely, but form's pretty common and it's a little bit of an easier way to jump into it. So let's start with that. All right, I'll start out by pulling up my template here. And what we'll do is I'll just go ahead and add a new template part here. So we'll just start out by calling this form. And add a new file called form.php. Inside of this, we'll just set up kind of a basic form. Don't need to set really any action right now because it's going to be intercepted by AJAX. Let's go ahead and just add a input. Type text is fine. Call this email. Let's go ahead and add another input. We'll make this actually a hidden one. Call it action. And let's just call this my action. So I'll actually use this to identify which AJAX in case we were going to have multiple AJAX. The way WordPress handles it is it really uses this name here, passing in as action as kind of the unique ID that we can attach to the hooks and filters to get this AJAX to run. And lastly, let's just add a submit button here. Let's start with that. Refresh our page. We've got a little form, email field, submit button. Submit button obviously just reloads. So now we can intercept that with JavaScript. So, all right, next up what we can do. So part of what we need here is to be able to hit the WordPress handler with our JavaScript. So let's actually head over to our functions file where we're loading our theme JavaScript here. And what I'll do here is add WP localize script. This starts out by using the handle of the script that you want to attach to. So basically what this does is this allows you to pass some global variables into your page attached to a specific script or something you're enqueuing there. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll attach this to our current JavaScript. So we'll just use the same handle that we're already using up above. Then we can name what our global variable is going to be. So for this tutorial, I'll just call it AJAX. And then we can tell it what data we want to pass in. So really right now, what I'm looking for is just kind of the dynamic URL for the AJAX endpoint, especially if our site were to change URLs or something. It's, the more we can have be dynamic, the better. So let's go ahead and add that URL. And then we'll add that endpoint. So this function, admin URL, actually is a WordPress function that points to this folder in WordPress. And then admin-ajax.php is an actual file here. Again, if you look through this, you could see kind of how it all works. It's a little less magical than you might think, although it looks a little messy or a little confusing. But I'll show you a couple of things on that later on here. So really, once we do this, if we go back to our site here, I'll just actually open up the inspector. So what this does is, so it actually passes in a global JavaScript variable into our page here. So this is just kind of for anything to use. Technically, it's tied to our JavaScript. So it's always going to be loaded right before our JavaScript. And also, if we were to disable this JavaScript from running, it would actually completely disappear because it's dependent on that script. Just re-enable that. So now that we've got this global variable, we can actually jump over to our JavaScript file here. And I went ahead and added this comment. Technically, you don't need this comment, but for a lot of JavaScript post processors, if you define global up here, what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and tell the rest of the processor not to throw warnings about an undefined variable, since technically we're not defining the variable in this file. It's being defined at a global level. All right, so really what we can do here is we could start out by using jQuery to just reference our form element. And what we can do is we can attach the form submit handler, pass in a callback function, actually add that. And then really what we want to start by doing is just preventing it from actually submitting its default state. So prevent default we'll stop that from actually doing an actual form submission. So let's go ahead and just test that real quick. So submit now doesn't actually reload the page, which is what we want. And then what we can use here also is jQuery's wrapper around AJAX post. And what this takes is, first it takes the URL that we want to hit. And so that's actually defined in our global AJAX variable. And we called that URL as the subparameter is URL here. So let's just reference that, ajax.url. Second parameter is the data that we want to pass. So the primary thing that we need to pass is actually that action name. And we could pass it through an object, something like this, action equals my action, and that would work. One of the ways I like to do it, especially when doing forms, is actually just serialize the form itself. So that's partially why I actually in our form here went in and added a hidden input, just so it would have that that element in the data there. So, and then the third parameter here is just our callback after it's sent. So we'll just do that. All right. And what we can do here is let's just start out by logging the response to see what we get. So what we have here is we're getting our form. On submission, we're preventing it from doing its default submission, and then instead we're posting to our AJAX URL with the serialization of our form fields. Let's just jump over here, refresh our page, open up our network tab, and so I'll go ahead and just submit, and you can see it sends a request to that admin AJAX URL. You can see it's got the full URL here. If we click on this, we can actually inspect the headers and see, okay, it passed an empty email because we didn't put an email in there. Looks like it passed an action, but that looks like it's empty. And then we've got some other character here. So let's just check our form real quick. All right. Just log our serialized form here. So let me just refresh this, and let's just pass in a fake sample of data here. Okay. Oh, so it looks like what we need to do here is actually pass in name twice, which doesn't really make sense. And this was supposed to be value. So let's get that switched up there. Go ahead, refresh, and submit. And there we go. We can see email equals action, email equals nothing, action equals my action, and S equals. So let's actually just fix up this submit button as well. All right, so we should be good to go from there. Let me just do one more submission here. All right, perfect. Okay, but it's responding with 400 because we haven't actually set up a form handler. So technically, if we were to jump back into that AJAX handler that WordPress has, you can see it's got a list of a bunch of its actions that are kind of predefined. What it does primarily is when we hit that endpoint, it checks for a post or a get action with that name, and then it just runs a WordPress default filter with the WP_AJAX prefix here. And then really, if it gets through here and there's no actions, then really what it's going to do is just send a 400 and die with a 0. So if you're getting that 0, that's what's happening there. That means your handler's not set up. So let's just go ahead and jump in and set up a handler. So for now, what we'll do is we'll actually just jump back to our functions file, and let's set up a handler down here. We'll call this AJAX handlers handle my action. No return. Then let's just go ahead and do function handle my action. Obviously, these are arbitrary function names. Even the action itself is arbitrary. The name is here. It can be whatever you want as long as they're the same on all sides. So what we'll do here is let's just go ahead and get the email that we passed in. So this would be inside of the underscore post global variable. Then let's just finish this by using WordPress's WP send JSON success. We'll just pass the email back. Obviously, wouldn't want to actually do this because this would need to be sanitized. Otherwise, people can hack your form pretty easily. But maybe what we'll also add is just if no email, we'll just jump out early with an error. So technically, if you were to look up these functions in the WordPress documentation, you would notice that this actually runs exit. So even though we're not returning it, it will kill the rest of the process. You could add return just so it's more clear that we're jumping out, because I like these one-liner if statements for stuff like this. But it's just a little peek behind the curtain of some of those functions. So, all right, lastly here is doing the actual tying it together with the WordPress actions. So let's go ahead and add action, WP AJAX, and then really this is just the name of our action. So in our JavaScript, or actually in our form here, we did my action with a hyphen. So this is kind of that key variable that's being tied dynamically to this WP AJAX. We'll go ahead and add that. So actually AJAX by default, it requires the user to be logged in. So I think AJAX initially was primarily set up to be used for admin side of stuff, especially. It's used quite a bit throughout the admin side of WordPress. But so there's actually two actions we can attach to. One is just the default WP AJAX, and then we can also specify the no privacy version, which allows it for public connections or anything, even if you're not authenticated as a user in the WordPress site actively. So we'll go ahead and just attach both of those. They won't both run at the same time, but that'll handle both logged in and non-logged in users. So really what's happening here just conceptually is when the form gets submitted, JavaScript is picking it up and canceling the default submission, and instead it's sending its form data to the AJAX URL. The AJAX URL through that WordPress file picks it up and automatically runs an action. We're attaching to that action, getting that posted data, and then determining whether we're going to send back a success message or an error. Let's just go ahead and save this, refresh our page here, give it a test. So you can see we got a 200 status code, so that means the action itself was handled. So let's go ahead and check this out, and you can see actually what we got back here was success equals true. So that's a part of the WP send JSON success by default sends back success true, whereas WP send JSON error would send it back as false. And then second parameter data here is because we passed the email back in. So this is actually equivalent to whatever we pass here. So you can see if I add other stuff here, our next AJAX request has that dynamic content. So, and then let's try once with it being empty here. And that's a success false. So really that's kind of it. You could bind the JavaScript to other things like a button click in general, or a load more for posts or something else entirely. And really this allows you to do pretty much anything you would want through WordPress functions, etc. And pass back details to be handled or output or appended to the DOM through JavaScript. So pretty lightweight and easy. WordPress has made some commonly used things like that very, very usable through some of their existing APIs. And although you could do quite a bit more of a custom version, it's the WordPress recommended way and saves a lot of time. So I'll leave you with that, and hopefully this helps you in your AJAX WordPress journey.